Lisa Carter had just finished a long shift at the police station. She was tired but decided to stop by a well-known department store before heading home. She wanted to buy a nice gift for her niece's birthday. Dressed in casual clothes, she walked into the store, looking at different items. She loved shopping, but today, she just wanted to find something quickly and leave. As she browsed through the shelves, she noticed a young store employee watching her nervously. She didn't think much of it at first. Being a police officer, she was used to people acting a little uneasy around authority figures, even when she wasn't in uniform. But after a few minutes, she started to feel something was off. A man in a police uniform entered the store. He was a tall, broad-shouldered officer with a stern expression. His name tag read Officer Rick Sanders. Lisa had never met him before, but she had heard about him from other officers. He had a reputation for being aggressive, especially toward certain people. She sighed, hoping he wasn't there for her. But just as she picked up a small jewelry box to check the price, she heard a sharp voice behind her. "Ma'am, put that down." Lisa turned, surprised. Officer Sanders was standing just a few feet away, looking at her like she had done something wrong. She raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me. I need to see your receipt," he said, stepping closer. Lisa frowned. "I don't have a receipt. I haven't bought anything yet." Sanders crossed his arms. "Then why are you holding that?" Lisa couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Because I'm shopping," she said calmly. "That's how stores work." But Sanders wasn't listening. His eyes were filled with suspicion. "We've had some reports of theft in this store. I need you to step aside so I can check your bag." Lisa took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. She had been a police officer long enough to know that reacting angrily wouldn't help. "I don't have a bag," she said, holding up her small purse. "And I haven't taken anything." "You're making a mistake." Sanders wasn't convinced. "I need to do my job. Step away from the merchandise and put your hands where I can see them." People around them started to notice. Some customers whispered to each other, while others took out their phones to record. Lisa felt her face grow hot. She wasn't embarrassed for herself. She was angry that this was happening at all. "Officer, I'm a police captain," she said firmly, pulling out her badge. "If you take a second to check, you'll realize you're making a huge mistake." But Sanders barely glanced at it. "I don't care who you say you are," he snapped. "You're coming with me." Before Lisa could protest, he grabbed her arm and pulled out his handcuffs. Gasps filled the store as he locked them around her wrists. Lisa stayed quiet, but inside, she knew this was far from over. Lisa stood still, her wrists locked in cold handcuffs as Officer Sanders gripped her arm tightly. The murmurs around them grew louder. Customers whispered to each other, some pulling out their phones to record what was happening. The store employees looked uncomfortable, but no one stepped forward to stop it. Lisa could feel their stares, their curiosity mixing with disbelief. She had spent years serving her community, upholding the law with honor, and now she was being treated like a criminal in the middle of a department store. Sanders puffed out his chest as if he had just made an important arrest. He looked around, almost expecting applause. "Let's go," he said firmly, pulling Lisa toward the exit. Lisa held her head high. She refused to let this moment break her. "You're making a mistake," she told him, her voice calm but firm. Sanders scoffed. "That's what they all say," he muttered under his breath. Lisa clenched her jaw. She wanted to argue, but she knew better. Anything she said right now wouldn't matter. He had already decided she was guilty, and nothing she said would change that. A young store employee, a woman who had been organizing clothes nearby, stepped forward hesitantly. "Excuse me, officer," she said nervously. I don't think she took anything. I've been watching, and she didn't leave the store yet." Sanders barely looked at her. "Stay out of this," he snapped. "But I said stay out of it," Sanders repeated, his voice sharp. The young woman bit her lip and stepped back, looking helpless. Lisa took a deep breath. She had faced difficult situations before, but never like this. The humiliation of being dragged through the store, with people pointing and whispering, was something she had never imagined. She thought of all the officers she had trained, all the time she had told them to treat people with fairness and respect. And here she was, being treated like she was nothing. As they reached the front of the store, a security guard approached. He looked confused. "What's going on here?" "I caught her stealing," Sanders said confidently. "We're taking her in." The security guard frowned. "Did you check the cameras?" "I don't need to," Sanders replied. "I saw her myself." Lisa took a deep breath, trying to control her frustration. "You're arresting me without any evidence, without checking anything." "I don't need evidence when I see something suspicious," Sanders said, tightening his grip on her arm. A few customers gasped. Some shook their heads in disbelief. One man stepped forward. "This isn't right," he said. "You didn't even let her explain." Sanders shot him a sharp look. "Stay out of police business." Lisa looked around. More people were recording now. The store's manager had come out, her expression filled with concern. "Officer," she said carefully, "maybe we should check the security footage first." Sanders shook his head. "She's coming with me." Lisa couldn't believe what she was hearing. Even with people stepping forward, even with the store manager questioning him, Sanders refused to listen. He was too caught up in his own power, too convinced that he was right. But Lisa knew something he didn't. This wasn't going to end the way he thought. She let him lead her out of the store, but she wasn't worried. She wasn't scared. She was waiting. Waiting for the moment when he would realize the huge mistake he had made. The ride to the police station was silent. Lisa sat in the back of the patrol car, her hands still cuffed. She had been in police cars thousands of times, but never like this. Through the window, she could see the city passing by, familiar streets she had driven down many times as an officer. But now she was being treated like a suspect. Officer Sanders sat in the front, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. He looked straight ahead, not saying a word. Lisa could tell that he was confident in what he had done. He thought he had caught a thief. He thought he had done his job well. Lisa, however, knew better. When they pulled into the station, Sanders stepped out and opened the back door. "Let's go," he said, gripping Lisa's arm firmly. She didn't resist. She didn't argue. She simply followed him inside. The moment they entered the station, heads turned. Officers looked up from their desks, surprised to see Lisa in handcuffs. Some frowned. Others whispered to each other. Lisa could see the confusion on their faces. They knew her. They respected her. And now she was being brought in like a common criminal. At the front desk, a sergeant on duty looked up. His eyes widened in shock. "Captain Carter," he said, standing up. "She was caught shoplifting," Sanders said confidently, placing a firm hand on Lisa's shoulder. The sergeant's face darkened. He looked at Lisa, then back at Sanders. "Shoplifting," he repeated slowly, as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. "Yes," Sanders said. "I caught her in the act." Lisa finally spoke. "I didn't steal anything." The sergeant looked at her closely. He had worked with her for years. He knew her character. He knew what kind of officer she was, and something didn't feel right. "Did you check her badge?" the sergeant asked, his voice sharp. Sanders scoffed. "She showed me something, but anyone can fake a badge." Silence filled the room. A few officers exchanged glances. The sergeant's jaw tightened. "Take off the cuffs." "Now." Sanders hesitated. "But." "Now, Officer Sanders," the sergeant barked. Reluctantly, Sanders pulled out his key and unlocked the handcuffs. Lisa rubbed her wrists but stayed silent. The sergeant turned to her. "Captain, are you okay?" "I'm fine," Lisa said, though she wasn't. She was angry, but she knew this wasn't the time to explode. "Someone get the chief down here," the sergeant ordered. Within minutes, the police chief arrived. He was an older man with years of experience, and the moment he saw Lisa, his face hardened. "What is going on?" Lisa spoke calmly. I was arrested for shoplifting. Without evidence, without a proper investigation. The chief's face turned red with anger. He turned to Sanders. Did you check the store cameras? No, sir, Sanders admitted. Did you find any stolen items on her? No, sir. Did you confirm her identity before arresting her? Sanders hesitated. He looked around, realizing that the entire station was watching. The chief's voice was like ice. Do you know who you just arrested? Sanders swallowed hard. He suddenly looked unsure. She said she was a captain. But you didn't believe her, the chief finished for him. He took a deep breath, then turned to Lisa. Captain Carter, I deeply apologize for this. You will not be treated this way in this department. Lisa nodded, but she wasn't satisfied yet. She knew this wasn't over. Sanders had made a terrible mistake, and now he was about to face the consequences. The room was completely silent. Officer Sanders stood frozen, realizing the weight of his mistake. His confidence, which had been so strong just minutes ago, was now slipping away. The chief's sharp gaze was locked onto him, and every officer in the station was watching. Some looked disappointed, others shook their heads. They all knew that something serious was about to happen. Lisa Carter stood tall, even after the humiliation she had just faced. Her wrists were sore from the handcuffs, but she ignored the pain. Right now, the only thing she cared about was making sure that this situation was handled properly. She had spent years working hard, proving herself as a leader in the department, and in one moment, Sanders had tried to strip that away from her. The chief took a deep breath before speaking again. Officer Sanders, do you understand what you've done? Sanders shifted uncomfortably. Sir, I thought. You thought wrong. The chief interrupted, his voice firm. You arrested a highly respected police captain without checking facts, without evidence, and without following proper procedures. You humiliated her in public, refused to confirm her identity, and ignored multiple witnesses who tried to tell you the truth. Is that how we do things in this department? Sanders lowered his head. No, sir. The chief's expression didn't soften. I want your badge and your gun. Right now. Gasps filled the station. Sanders' face turned pale. Sir, please. You're suspended, effective immediately, the chief said, until we complete a full investigation. Sanders hesitated, but he had no choice. With shaky hands, he removed his badge and placed it on the desk. Then he took off his gun belt and set it down beside the badge. He stood there for a moment, looking lost. Just an hour ago, he had been so sure of himself. Now, his entire career was on the line. Lisa watched quietly, her emotions a mix of anger and disappointment. She had worked so hard to build respect in this department, and yet even her own badge hadn't been enough to protect her from someone like Sanders. If this could happen to her, she knew it could happen to others as well. The chief turned to Lisa. Captain Carter, again, I apologize for what happened today. This is not how we operate. I promise you that this matter will be handled with full transparency. Lisa nodded. I appreciate that, Chief. But this isn't just about me. It's about the way officers like Sanders treat people. If I wasn't a captain, if I had been just another citizen, this could have ended much worse. The chief sighed. You're right. And that's exactly why we need to take action. He turned to the sergeant at the desk. I want an internal review started immediately. I also want to see Officer Sanders' past complaints and reports. If there's a pattern here, we need to know. Sanders' face turned even paler. He knew what that meant. His record wasn't perfect. There had been other complaints against him before. Accusations of unfair treatment, reports of profiling, but nothing had ever been taken seriously, until now. Lisa took a deep breath. She wasn't happy about what had happened, but she was relieved that people were finally paying attention. This wasn't just about clearing her name. This was about making sure something like this never happened again. As she turned to leave the station, She could feel the eyes of her fellow officers on her. Some nodded at her in respect. Others avoided her gaze, ashamed of what had just taken place. Sanders, now standing alone without his badge or gun, looked at the chief desperately. "Sir, is there any way to fix this?" The chief's response was cold. "That depends on the investigation. But I'll tell you this, whatever happens next, you brought it on yourself." Lisa walked out of the station, knowing that karma was already starting to do its job. Lisa walked out of the station, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened. The cold air hit her face, but she barely noticed it. Her mind was still processing everything, being falsely accused, humiliated in public, arrested without proof, and now seeing Officer Sanders finally face consequences for his actions. She had spent years working hard, proving herself in a tough profession. She had climbed the ranks through dedication and fairness, making sure she treated everyone with respect. And yet today, none of that had mattered. One officer's bias, one officer's bad judgment, had nearly taken away everything she had worked for. But this wasn't over yet. Lisa wasn't the type of person to stay silent. She had faced challenges before, and she knew the best way to create change was to make sure people understood what had happened. As she reached her car, her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Several missed calls and messages from fellow officers, friends, and even news reporters. She wasn't surprised. People had recorded everything in the store, and by now, the video was likely spreading fast. She took a deep breath and called one of her close colleagues, Lieutenant Mark Davis. He picked up immediately. "Lisa, are you okay?" he asked, his voice full of concern. "I'm fine," she said, though the frustration in her tone was clear. "But you saw what happened." "Yeah, the video is everywhere. People are talking about it. This is bad, Lisa. Not for you. For Sanders. His career might be over." Lisa sighed. "This isn't just about him, Mark. This is about something bigger. If this could happen to me, think about how many times it's happened to others who don't have a badge to defend themselves." Mark was silent for a moment. Then he said, "I hear you. So, what do you want to do?" Lisa didn't hesitate. "I want to talk about it, not just inside the department, but to the public. People need to understand that things like this are still happening, and they need to know that it won't be ignored." Mark let out a breath. "You know that's going to cause a storm, right?" "I know," Lisa said, "but it's necessary." After ending the call, she sat in her car for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She had worked so hard to be respected in this profession, but today had proven that some people still saw her differently. She wasn't just another officer to Sanders. She was someone he assumed was guilty before even checking the facts. And that needed to change. The next morning, Lisa woke up to find her name all over the news. The video from the store had gone viral. Social media was flooded with discussions about what had happened. Some people were outraged, calling for justice. Others were shocked that even a high-ranking officer like Lisa Carter could be treated unfairly. At the station, an internal investigation had already begun. Reports about Sanders' past behavior were being pulled up. Complaints that had been ignored before were now being taken seriously. Lisa knew that this was only the beginning. She had a platform now, and she planned to use it. She wasn't just going to clear her name. She was going to make sure no one else had to go through what she did. The next few days were a whirlwind. Lisa's phone didn't stop buzzing. Reporters wanted interviews. Community leaders reached out to her. Fellow officers called to offer their support. The video of her wrongful arrest had spread like wildfire. And now, everyone was talking about it. Lisa wasn't someone who sought attention. She had always believed in letting her work speak for itself. But this time was different. This wasn't just about her. It was about the larger issue of how people were treated based on assumptions rather than facts. She arrived at the police station early that morning, ready to face whatever was coming next. As she walked in, officers looked at her with different expressions, some nodding respectfully, some avoiding eye contact. The station felt different. The weight of what had happened still lingered in the air. Sergeant Matthews, the same officer who had demanded Sanders remove her handcuffs, approached her. "Captain Carter," he said, his voice respectful. "The chief wants to see you in his office." Lisa nodded. "I figured." She walked through the station, feeling the stares on her back. When she reached the chief's office, she knocked once before stepping inside. The chief sat behind his desk, looking serious. He gestured for her to take a seat. "Lisa, I won't waste time. The investigation into Officer Sanders is moving fast. We found multiple complaints against him in the past, but they were never properly addressed." Lisa wasn't surprised. "And now?" The chief sighed. "Now, they can't be ignored. The public is demanding answers. The department is under pressure. The mayor has even called, asking what's being done about this situation." Lisa folded her arms. "Good, because this isn't just about Sanders. It's about making sure this doesn't happen again." The chief nodded slowly. "I understand. That's why I need your help. I want to make real changes in how we handle these situations. We need better training. We need better accountability. And I want you to be part of that process." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Are you saying you want me to lead this?" "Yes," the chief said firmly. "You've always been one of the most respected officers in this department. If anyone can help fix this, it's you." Lisa took a deep breath. She had spent years working to create positive change within the department, but now she had an opportunity to make an even bigger impact. "I'll do it," she said, "but I want full authority to make the changes needed. No empty promises." The chief gave her a firm nod. "You have my word." Lisa stood up. "Then let's get to work." As she left the office, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about making sure that no officer, no person, was ever treated unfairly again. Meanwhile, Officer Sanders sat at home, watching the news. His suspension had become public knowledge, and the investigation into his past behavior was being talked about everywhere. He never thought his career would end like this. He had always believed he was doing his job right, but now he was facing the reality of his mistakes. And for the first time, he was forced to ask himself a hard question. Had he been wrong all along? Lisa wasted no time. Now that she had the chief's full support, she got to work immediately. She started reviewing policies, speaking with officers, and gathering data on past complaints. She wanted to understand exactly where the system had failed, so she could help fix it. The news continued to cover the story, and public pressure on the department grew stronger. People wanted to know what changes were being made. Community leaders requested meetings, and Lisa made sure to be present. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for fairness for everyone. One afternoon, as she sat in a meeting room reviewing case files, Lieutenant Mark Davis walked in. He had a folder in his hands and a serious look on his face. "You're going to want to see this," he said, placing the folder in front of her. Lisa opened it and scanned the documents. Her eyes widened. This is Sanders' history." Mark nodded. "Yes, and it's worse than we thought. Multiple complaints about unfair treatment, making arrests without evidence, and even a few cases where his behavior was questioned, but never properly investigated." Lisa clenched her jaw. How did he get away with this for so long? Mark sighed. A mix of things. Lack of oversight, reports being buried, and honestly, people just not taking it seriously enough. Until now. Lisa closed the folder and took a deep breath. This proves that what happened to me wasn't an accident. It was part of a pattern. He judged people before knowing the facts. And I wasn't the first victim. Mark nodded. The chief has already seen this. He's preparing a statement. I think Sanders is about to face real consequences this time. Lisa leaned back in her chair. She had known that what happened to her was wrong, but now she had proof that the system had failed in more ways than one. This wasn't just about one bad officer. It was about making sure things like this didn't keep happening. Later that evening, Lisa received a call from an unexpected number. She hesitated before answering. "Hello." A familiar voice came through the line. "Captain Carter, it's Sanders." Lisa raised an eyebrow. This was the last person she expected to hear from. "What do you want, Sanders?" There was a pause. I just wanted to say I messed up." Lisa stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. "I should have listened," he said, his voice lower than usual. "I should have checked before assuming the worst. I was wrong, and now I'm paying the price for it." Lisa wasn't sure how to respond. Part of her was still angry, but another part of her knew that this wasn't just about punishing Sanders. It was about changing things for the better. "You didn't just mess up, Sanders," she finally said. "You hurt people. Not just me, but others before me. And now you have to live with that." "I know," he admitted. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to say it." Lisa sighed. "It's not about forgiveness. It's about making sure no one else has to go through what I did." There was another pause. "I hope you can fix things," Sanders said. Lisa's grip on the phone tightened. "I will." And with that, she ended the call. She had work to do. Lisa stood in front of a packed room at the community center. Officers, city officials, and local residents had gathered to hear about the changes that were coming. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind. Investigations, policy changes, and difficult conversations. But now she was here to share the results of her work. She looked around the room, taking in the faces of people who had supported her, doubted her, or simply wanted answers. This was more than just a speech. This was a turning point. Taking a deep breath, she began. "What happened to me was not just about one bad decision. It was about a broken system that allowed bias to go unchecked. But I stand here today to tell you that things are changing." The room was silent, everyone listening carefully. "The department is implementing new training programs focused on fair treatment and accountability. Complaints will no longer be ignored. They will be investigated properly, and action will be taken when necessary. We are also improving the way officers handle situations like mine, making sure that facts come first, not assumptions." A few people in the audience nodded, while others whispered among themselves. Lisa continued, "This isn't just about policy changes. It's about trust. Our job as officers is to serve and protect, but that means protecting everyone, not just a select few. I am committed to making sure that no one else, whether a civilian or a fellow officer, experiences what I went through." The crowd erupted into applause. Some people even stood up, showing their support. Lisa felt a wave of relief. This was why she had fought so hard. After the event, several people approached her. Some were officers who promised to do better. Some were community leaders who wanted to work with her. And others were just ordinary citizens thanking her for standing up. As she stepped outside, Mark joined her. "That was powerful," he said. "You really made an impact today." Lisa nodded. "This is just the beginning. We have a lot of work to do." Mark smiled. "Yeah, but if anyone can do it, it's you." Lisa took a deep breath, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. She had turned a painful experience into something meaningful. She had taken back her dignity, not just for herself, but for others who had been wronged. Meanwhile, Officer Sanders was nowhere to be seen. His suspension had turned into termination, and he was now facing a full review of his past actions. The consequences had finally caught up with him. Karma had done its job. But Lisa wasn't focused on him anymore. She was focused on the future, on making sure that no one else had to fight as hard as she did just to be treated fairly. With a determined heart, she walked away, ready for the next chapter.